was standing at the range stirring a small portion of butternut squash soup, the variety Caleb would request whenever he had a cold, when my mobile device vibrated on the counter. I wasn't anticipating anything eventful. Perhaps a birthday greeting or even a belated cancellation. But when I unlocked the display, there was just one communication. Don't call or come over. We're done. No punctuation, no clarification, only those words. My fingers remained suspended, unmoving. Then I typed got it and pressed send. I shut off the burner and pushed the pot to the side. The gas flame hissed as it vanished, leaving the kitchen eerily silent. Too silent. I didn't weep. I didn't shout. I didn't return the call. I merely stood there, my hand still gripping the wooden spoon, allowing the full impact of it all to settle upon me. I cleaned the countertop with the same cloth I had utilized for numerous years. Then I neatly folded it and placed it down, full. The following day, I took out the small overnight case I had used years prior when Caleb was hospitalized. Same bag, same zipper, but this time I wasn't packing it with anticipation or concern, only firm determination. 2 outfits, my prescriptions, the thick flannel wrap my sister had knitted before her passing, and the picture of Caleb and me from his graduation. Not because I needed the photo, but because I desired to recall how he looked when he still acknowledged me. I retrieved the bank portfolio from the filing cabinet, the one labeled personal assets. Everything else I left untouched. Let them figure it out. I checked the locks again, then left a note for the neighbor to feed the cat. I didn't specify my destination, only that I would be gone indefinitely. As I stepped outside, the wind had intensified. It was cooler than I had foreseen. I zipped up the bag, started the automobile, and drove off without glancing back as the porch light dimmed behind me. By the time I reached the outskirts of Asheville, the quietness within the car had permeated my being. The journey away from Asheville was lengthy and dark, but my body knew the path by rote. Somewhere past Hendersonville, I began to reminisce, my fingers gripping the steering wheel tightly. Caleb was 5 when James died. A slick road, a late-night truck, and a call at 2:12 a.m. that cleanly severed my life in two. From that point on, it was just me. I suppressed my sorrow beneath night shifts at the hospital, snatching sleep between school drop-offs and extra hours. Some weeks I would accumulate 60 hours, barely enough time to wash the antiseptic odor from my skin before collecting him from soccer practice. Every extra dollar went toward Caleb. Birthday celebrations I couldn't attend but financed regardless. School excursions I never experienced growing up. I ensured he never felt what I did. Need, disgrace being secondary to survival. When he gained admission to Chapel Hill, I wept in the laundry room where nobody could see me. I covered what his grants did not, even selling James' collection of watches for the initial semester payment. He hadn't asked me to. I simply did it, as I always had. After university, he wanted a vehicle for job interviews. I handed him the keys to mine and relied on the bus for half a year. When he phoned to say he had proposed to Maya, I offered to cover the location deposit without hesitation. James would have wanted that, I convinced myself. 3 years ago, when he mentioned financial difficulties and the baby's arrival, I permitted them to move into my second property without paying rent. I paid the property taxes, the upkeep, the insurance. Since I told others I was proud of him, that he was establishing something, but I could discern the fractures before they materialized. Still, I gave. Not out of compulsion, but because my affection for him was profound. I wanted him to feel supported, even though no one had ever supported me. Now the lights of the fuel station flickered in the distance, and I realized I had been holding my breath since departing. I pulled over and sat in silence, listening to the engine cooling and ticking. In the initial years following Caleb's marriage, I attempted to keep a sufficient distance to allow them a feeling of autonomy, yet close enough to still be relevant. Sundays were reserved for family. I would bring pastries, assist with the baby, and discreetly slip grocery money into Maya's purse when she wasn't looking. It felt good to still be necessary, even in small, inconspicuous ways. Then circumstances changed. It was subtle initially, a message about altering dinner arrangements, a missed call that was never returned. One Thanksgiving, I arrived with a casserole only to discover the driveway empty. They had gone to Maya's parents' residence and forgotten to inform me. Maya called later that evening, apologizing, but her tone lacked emotion. Hey, Caleb didn't even come to the phone. Christmases transformed into brief visits where I sat holding my granddaughter while they retreated to another room to field calls. My birthday that year passed with nothing more than a text saying, "Hope you had a nice day, Mom." I rationalized that they were busy. Everyone gets busy. But I observed how they always seemed to find time for everyone else. Her relatives, her friends, even colleagues they barely knew. For me, there was consistently a justification, consistently an apology. When Maya's sister came to visit, I stopped by with flowers and biscuits for the children. I was in the kitchen rinsing the vase when I overheard it. Maya's voice, hushed but distinct through the open entrance. "She means well," she commented, "but she's kind of a downer." The words struck like shattering glass. I remained perfectly still, my hands under the cold water until they became numb. When I returned to the living room, Maya smiled as if nothing had occurred. I smiled too. That night, I sat in my car for a long time before driving back home. Following that, I ceased calling as frequently. I waited for an invitation instead of asking. Weeks turned into months, and silence filled the voids where family used to be. It was the type of silence that demonstrates how insignificant you have become. And I endured it silently because I was not yet ready to abandon the effort. When Caleb and Maya moved into the Asheville house, I never requested rent. It wasn't kindness. It was instinctive. He explained they needed time to recover financially, that childcare was expensive, that Maya's hours had been reduced. I remembered the feeling of stretching every dollar until it broke. So I said, "Don't worry about it. Just look after each other." And I genuinely meant it. I kept the mortgage payments current, managed the insurance, and quietly covered repairs when things malfunctioned. Caleb assumed those matters simply took care of themselves. He never inquired, and I never disclosed it. When the tax lien hit last year, $12,000, he panicked. He called in the middle of the night, claiming he didn't know how it had happened. I didn't ask questions. I drove to the county office the next morning and settled the debt before they could post a notice on the door. He never mentioned it again. Not a thank you, not even a text. I still maintained joint ownership of both residences. James and I had arranged it that way after his mishap to safeguard the family. Caleb was unaware that this granted me equal authority to sell, refinance, or take possession. I never exercised that authority, never even brought it up. I believed in letting them establish their own home, even if it was constructed with my resources. And then there was Harper, their daughter, my granddaughter. They mentioned they couldn't afford the private school downtown, the one with the specialized reading curriculum she required. I understood what it meant to lag behind early on. Contacted the school directly, established an anonymous donor account, and paid the tuition every month without fail. Caleb assumed the school had awarded them a grant. Maya speculated it must have been a divine favor. They were correct. There was an only. I stored all the receipts in a file marked H Education in my filing cabinet, hidden behind old tax documents and birth certificates. I never mentioned it, not once. Because sometimes love is manifested through silence. And silence is what I offered until it wasn't. It was a Saturday afternoon when I chose to drive over to the house. I had completed a quilt for Harper, soft pastel colors and tiny stitched stars. Her favorites. I hadn't seen her in weeks, and I missed the sound of her voice describing her books to me. I didn't phone ahead. I simply wished to see her face, perhaps stay for a cup of tea before heading home. When I drove into the driveway, their car was present. Music was drifting from the living room window, the kind Maya enjoyed while cooking. I smiled, relieved. For an instant, it felt like things could still be uncomplicated. I knocked twice, the quilt neatly folded in my arms. The door opened just enough for Maya to appear. Her hair was pulled back, a polite smile fixed in place. "Oh, Evelyn," she remarked, her voice light. "We weren't expecting you." "I finished Harper's quilt," I said. "Thought I'd drop it off." Her hand clutched the door frame. "She's taking a nap," she said quickly. "Maybe another time." I hesitated, my fingers gripping the fabric tighter. "It's all right," I said. "I can just leave it inside." She shook her head. "Actually, Caleb's working on a deadline. The house is a mess." I stood there looking past her shoulder. I could hear Harper giggling from somewhere deeper inside the house. "I won't stay long." Maya stepped slightly forward, obstructing the view. Her smile remained rigid. "Next week, okay?" "Just text first." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. The wind caught the edge of the quilt, and I pressed it against my chest to keep it from slipping. She closed the door gently. Without another word, I drove home in silence. The quilt remained on the passenger seat, still warm from my hands. That evening, my phone illuminated. "Don't call or come over. We're done." I read it once, twice, 3 times, hoping the words would change. They did not. I typed 2 words in return. "Got it." The morning after Caleb's message, I did not cry. I did not attempt to call. I did not offer an explanation. Instead, I compiled a list. I opened my laptop and started canceling every automatic payment. The mortgage on the Asheville property, the insurance premiums, the water bill, the security system, the landscaping service I had been quietly covering since they moved in. Next, I accessed the tuition portal and terminated the anonymous payment plan. Harper's school fees for the subsequent month would not be paid. He didn't do it to punish her. I did it because I was finished hiding behind silent sacrifices no one wished to acknowledge. Then came the bank. I drove downtown and waited in the branch waiting area until my name was called. Name was called. I requested that all shared accounts be frozen and closed. I presented my ID, answered security inquiries, and signed the final paperwork. "Do you wish to inform the joint holders?" the teller asked. "No," I replied. "They'll find out soon enough." From there, I walked 2 blocks to the lawyer's office. I had scheduled an appointment months prior, but had never followed through. This time, I did. I signed a notarized document formally stating my withdrawal from all financial and legal obligations connected to Caleb or Maya. Soda. A duplicate went into the safe deposit box. Another copy remained with me. I packed that night. Nothing extreme. 1 suitcase, a few journals, my sewing kit, the quilt I never managed to give. Before dawn, I filled the gas tank and headed west toward the Smoky Mountains. The cabin was small, nestled behind a gravel lane lined with dense pines. It had belonged to my Aunt Florence, who used to refer to it as her disappearing place. She bequeathed it to me in a handwritten will decades ago. No one else in the family even knew of its existence. I parked in the shade, unlocked the door, and stepped into the stillness. No messages, no calls, no demands, just breath. My own. And for the first time in years, that was sufficient. By nightfall, I had a fire lit and tea prepared. The porch groaned underfoot as I stood gazing out into the trees, waiting for the tranquility to settle. It commenced 3 days after my departure. I switched my phone on momentarily just to check the forecast, and within seconds, the screen was illuminated with missed calls. 27 voicemails, 41 text messages, mostly from Caleb, a few from Maya, 1 from an unfamiliar number, likely the bank. I didn't open any of them. I simply turned the phone back off and put it in the drawer near the fireplace. I already understood what they were conveying. When the water service was disconnected, I picture Maya calling the city, bewildered. Perhaps she accused someone of making an error. She would have checked the account and noticed my name, then realized the card on file had been declined. The same scenario with the internet, the gardening service, the security system that sounded every time a door was opened. They must have contacted the bank when the mortgage payment bounced. Caleb would have raised his voice, confused as to why the account was terminated. And that is when he would have heard the term that still gives people pause, joint owner. That was me. When the property tax notice arrived with a red seal across the top, I could envision him pacing the kitchen, blaming Maya, blaming the city, blaming everyone except himself and the school. I knew that would be the most difficult. Harper's tuition bill would not be paid punctually. The school would call gently at first, then more assertively. I had sustained that for 2 years without missing a month. But the instant I withdrew, everything fell apart. The network of ease they inhabited had been sustained by threads they never perceived. Threads I had quietly woven over decades, and now they were snapping one by one. I sought vengeance, but because I had finally relinquished control. I did not flee. I did not vanish out of spite. I merely extracted myself from a life where my existence only mattered when it was accompanied by a payment. As the fire crackled beside me and rain hit the roof in a steady rhythm, I permitted myself for the first time to experience what it was like to exist without being essential. It took a full month before I consented to meet with them. Caleb insisted on a public setting, so I selected a quiet coffee shop just off Main Street where we were unknown. I arrived first and sat near the window. My tea was already cold when they entered. Caleb's face was strained, his jaw tightened, his eyes already narrowed, as if he had come to a judgment, not a discussion. Maya trailed behind, her arms curled. Said her expression inscrutable. They sat down without greeting me. You proved your point, Caleb stated, leaning forward. But this entire vanishing act, it was cruel. I didn't reply immediately. I reached into my bag and set a folder on the table. Here's a list, I said. Every payment I've made for you over the last 7 years. Mortgage, insurance, taxes, tuition, groceries, even birthday parties. He glanced at it but did not touch it. That's not what this is about. No, I countered. It's about how you dismissed me with a single text after everything I sacrificed for you. Maya shifted awkwardly. You've always been generous, she said, as if seeking neutral territory. But perhaps it was excessive. Maybe we felt suffocated. Did Harper feel suffocated at school? I inquired, turning to her. Did you feel smothered when the refrigerator broke and I paid for the new one without saying anything? Caleb's voice escalated. You believe money equates to love? No, I stated softly. But love shouldn't necessitate annihilating myself to be accepted. He shook his head. So what happens now? You've cut us off. I'm selling the house, I announced. You'll receive the notice next week. It's time to disentangle things. Clear boundaries. No more assumptions. And no more assumptions. Maya's mouth tightened. You're punishing us. No, I replied, looking at both of them. I'm protecting myself. Caleb appeared stunned. Maya started to speak again, but I rose before she could. I left the folder on the table. At the doorway, I paused just long enough to see them frozen in place, surrounded by realities they never bothered to grasp. By the autumn, the legal matters were finalized. The Asheville house sold quicker than any of us had expected. The market was favorable, and the purchasers were unconcerned with its history. I signed the closing papers from a small legal office in Tennessee, handed over my copy of the deed, and felt the strangest combination of burden and release leave my chest. Caleb called once after the transaction was complete. I let it ring. Later, I learned from a neighbor that they had relocated to a rented property across town. Smaller, older, nothing like what they were accustomed to. It wasn't the depletion of luxury that wounded them. It was the absence of security. They had built their comfort on a structure I had quietly maintained, and now it was gone. I didn't boast. I didn't even feel gratification. What I felt was tranquility. The funds from the sale were more than I required. I met with a lawyer again, this time to establish something meaningful. Within a month, my remaining assets, savings, retirement, investments, were transferred to a foundation that financed a local women's shelter. They would name it after my Aunt Florence, the woman who taught me that solitude could be refuge, not retribution. When the final documents were signed, I departed the office without formality. I walked to the park across the street, sat on a bench, and observed the late afternoon light filtering through the trees. I had spent decades giving without limitations. Now I was giving without attachment. A year later, a postcard reached the cabin. The handwriting was unsteady. Careful, Savouille, careful. Hi, Grandma. Mom said you moved away. I miss you. Love, Harper. I read it twice before placing it on the mantelpiece next to the fire. I smiled, not from remorse, but from acknowledgement. Some bonds persist even after they are broken. The cabin became quieter with each passing season, but I did not mind the stillness. I spent my mornings in the garden, pulling out weeds with my bare hands, letting the soil ground me in ways people never could. Afternoons were dedicated to writing in my journal, with words flowing out with a gentleness I hadn't experienced in years. By evening, I would sit by the fire with a comforting book, the quiet drone of the forest settling around me like a covering. I didn't feel triumphant. There is no victory in walking away from individuals you once loved more than yourself. But I did feel unburdened, and that was enough. The heaviness I used to carry had trailed me like a shadow. Years of overextending, of smiling through dismissals, of providing while diminishing myself, and no one ever noticed. That was the burden of unseen affection, the kind you extend without being asked, the kind they presume will never be depleted. But it eventually is. I used to believe leaving signified failure, that if I had only been more patient, more tender, more understanding, they would have reconciled. I now comprehend how profoundly women are conditioned to remain quietly, perpetually, even when it destroys us. Sometimes I wonder how many other women are sitting in rooms like this one, surrounded by a silence they didn't choose but have finally accepted. How many wrote the checks, arrived early, stayed late, and were still met with closed doors and tight smiles? I don't feel resentment. I feel awakened. I feel awakened. There's serenity in tea, the absence of expectation, in cultivating tomatoes without concern for who will consume them, in kindling a fire solely for yourself. I still think of Harper. Sometimes I visualize her pulling the quilt up to her chin, tracing the stitching with her fingers. Perhaps one day she will find me, perhaps not, but that love, the one offered unconditionally, was genuine, and I hold on to it without remorse. So I ask you, have you ever been disregarded by someone you raised? How do you mourn a family that is still living but no longer belongs to you?